So today I want to talk about guest messaging, just the relevance of guest messaging, messaging as a whole, and then why guest messaging in hospitality, and then the future of what we're going to see in the next couple of years within guest messaging. All right, let's start with trends. Cool. So probably you've experienced it yourself because you message yourself with your friends on WhatsApp, etc. But actually, it's a important growth that we've seen in guest messaging. So almost 1/3 of the world population is going to use a messaging app in the next couple of years. That's amazing if you think about this. So the phone, if I talk today with my little son, he's actually always surprised that I can use it for calling someone, because he's only using it for messaging someone. So it's a complete new way of really how we as consumers and users communicate with each other. And if you compare this to what happened with other channels of communication, it's by far the fastest adoption we've ever seen. So you see the first 4 years on Facebook and Gmail and Twitter and Skype, how the adoption rate was. And now you compare that to WhatsApp just as one channel, and you see other channels in China and in Japan, etc. It's an extraordinary user growth that we've seen in the first 4 years. And obviously it created a lot of buzz. So I'm quoting T-News because they're our hosts. Messaging is an exploding engagement channel at hotels, but in general, it's an exploding channel. Messaging is the new language of the globe, has another competitor that said that. So I think it's been clear, and I wanted just to set the stage with these statistics, how important messaging is. So if you look at, and if you ask users, are you interested in using a messaging app like Facebook Messenger to communicate with with a business on service topics? We see now that the vast majority is ready to communicate with businesses on service topics. There's one country that is a little bit slower in adoption. I'm sorry, it's my home country in Germany, but in general, we'll catch up. But the other countries are already there, and we'll see this growing and growing. So let's talk about messaging in hospitality. And I want to start with what we call the traveler journey. So messaging is basically a form of communication. If you think of the hotel and the guest, it's a form of communication between those two, and it's basically used for various reasons, right? You ask questions, you have comments, concerns, you give feedback, etc. And if you look at the journey, you start on the search and shop side of things. So we use in the industry, and it's a well-known concept, reviews as a feedback tool for making a search and booking decision, right? You use TripAdvisor, or you go to booking.com and you see reviews there, and it's basically a feedback of guests that communicated on behalf of the service to the hotel, and then you display that and you make your booking decision based on that feedback. And then you have the on-site experience. You actually stay there as a guest, pre-stay and on-site experience, and then you leave. And what happens is everyone who leaves gets a survey, right? And astonishing is 20% of all users that leave the hotel actually write that survey. And that survey is turned into the review, right? You use that survey. You get this from booking.com, or you get it from the hotel. And that survey is basically becoming a review. And that review influences the search and shopping experience, right? This is how the circle continues. And we've always, in the industry, we always thought, OK, we've covered the search and booking path with reviews, and we've covered the post-stay feedback with surveys. But there's no way for us today to really capture the on-site experience. It's a black box. And the black box is today handled with a guest talks to the hotelier, walks to the reception, or calls. But there's no way of us capturing that data and make it usable and visible. So that's where guest messaging comes into play on the on-site pre-stay and on-site experience, because it's a way of communicating in real time. So looking at other statistics, would you be willing to respond to hotel companies via text messaging? And you see the statistics before. Yes, most of the users think this is a very useful way of communicating, or somewhat useful way. And I'm very much convinced that we'll see this green pie growing over the next couple of years as we will establish that communication channel between hotels and guests more and more. So messaging can be an app like WhatsApp and Facebook and Line and WeChat, but obviously it's SMS too, especially if you're in the US. Right? If you're in the US, most of the people say, well, we are going to use SMS and not WhatsApp as an example. SMS is the most used communication channel as an app for messaging in the US, and then we have Europe and other ways where we communicate on WhatsApp, and then you have Line in Japan and WeChat in China, etc. So that's one part. SMS, third-party messaging tools. Then we have web chat as another form of communication, as messaging communication back and forth. In-app, especially for the big brands that have an app where users are still using that app on Accor hotels or Hilton, etc., where you have a communication channel there that you can open up. Email is another way of old school messaging back and forth. And then obviously voice, and we'll talk about voice later, is establishing more and more as a communication channel. And that's not voice in terms of I'm calling you, but that's voice in Google Home and Amazon Alexa. So, and that's basically another statistic that talks to what I just said. SMS is the most used channel for accommodation. And that one of the reasons is because WhatsApp doesn't have an API yet. So meaning you couldn't use WhatsApp for business, for communication, other than using your personal phone and your personal WhatsApp account to communicate to other users or other guests. But it is not possible, like with Facebook or SMS, to integrate it in a solution and have all the WhatsApps that are coming in one inbox, like it is possible with SMS or Facebook Messenger and others. That's why we'll see the adoption, especially in these countries where WhatsApp is so popular, still be slow. And then once WhatsApp is opening up the API that is currently being tested in the market for some of the players, then we'll see a vast adoption rate in the industry. So let's look at some use cases of guest messaging in the hotel. I have some clicker problems here. So one of the use cases is service recovery. Hey, I need 2 more towels in my room. Traditionally, I either would have called or would have walked to the reception and tell them, today I could just text that and I receive it in my inbox in the reception or somewhere else or on my app. And I can say, yes, please bring 2 towels internally to room 303, and I create a task for my staff, and I respond back, sure, we'll be right up. So that's the workflow that we see today for hotels that have used and are using messaging components with the guests for service recovery. So another use case is status updates. How long until my order will be delivered to my room? So you ask questions, and instead of waiting or someone else talking to you or someone forgetting it, you have it all in there. You know that's a question that's not being answered, and then you can directly give the answer to that guest as an example here for a status update for something that the guest has requested. Okay, another use case is preemptive strikes. So imagine you're in a hotel and you know something is going wrong. You can inform your guests via messaging, much simpler and easier than today. And today is basically not really possible. You cannot call each and every room and tell them what's going on or make a big announcement in the hotel. So you could use those ways of communication for example, these preemptive strikes to inform guests what's happening and what's going to happen. And another way is, and I think that was one of the round panels before, it was personalization. Right? Of course, you can, because you know your guests, it's in your CRM or PMS, you can personalize the message and say, hey, here's something for you that we want to grant you, give you, offer you, or celebrate with you on a very personalized one-to-one communication, which is today possible with messaging, which is not possible with email on site, really, and it's not possible with calling, it's not really possible other than physical interaction. So there's a huge opportunity for hotels here. As we've discovered, 90% of our guests prefer communication issues directly during their stay instead of waiting until there was no opportunity for service recovery from the issues, which is pretty clear, meaning nothing else. And yes, I want, when I'm there and there's something wrong, I want to communicate about the issue, and I want the issue to be fixed, and I prefer a communication channel like a messaging channel. Sorry. Am I doing something wrong? Is it giving up on me? Have I skipped one slide yet? OK. What we see statistically, and you can prove that, is if someone is using a communication channel like messaging, the experience of these guests is better, meaning they give you a better score at the end of the day. So for those guests that use the communication channel back and forth, have a better experience, so they are more happy, meaning they give you a better score also in the post-stay survey, meaning you have a better reputation, meaning you will be searched and booked, and your hotel will have more revenue. So it's very simple. The better the experience, the better your scores are. And you can prove it statistically relevant that guests with messaging components are happier guests. One of the things that we hear when we talk with hotels, like they're afraid of, now we have a new system, and would that just create more operational burdens for us? And actually, if you actually use it, the opposite is true. So if you have a system like this, it's much easier to communicate. It's much in less time and less frictionless, and you don't lose the communication that you have started. Imagine you have started a communication with someone on day 1, and day 2, the staff changes. There's no way for someone to know what communication you had. But with messaging, you can store the entire communication thread, meaning it's much easier for the entire hotel staff to communicate, and it's much faster. And that obviously reduces cost. So I just wanted to quote one user. With this guest messaging tool, we have noticed that our overall performance score, which I just mentioned, like the overall happiness score of the guest, has improved because our guests can easily reach out to us and we solve the issues quickly. So that was the second part. So we started with messaging, super important channel. Second is messaging in hospitality is going to grow and it's going to stay. And we'll see more and more adoption in the future. And now I want to just quickly do an outlook of what's going to happen and what you already see happening in certain areas in messaging. So one area in messaging, which is probably you don't know about because it's being tested right now with Google, is you have, that's a live screenshot, and you can do it, I think, on your phone, of a restaurant in the US where you can message the restaurant because the restaurant in Google My Business has entered the messaging phone number that the user or the guest can message them. And they show you the response time of this messages, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that is already presented before the call option. You see how important that's going to be for users. It's presented before the call option, so that's going to happen. The same thing is going to happen in the hotel industry. It's already being tested with hotels, and we see this being adopted for hotels where you present this messaging option on Google, on your website, and everywhere in your hotel to inform your guests that this is now an option how you can reach out to us. Obviously, another one is voice with Alexa and Google Home. And if you think about voice, it's nothing else than you speak to something like this little device, and then this device turns that into text. And that text is being delivered to someone else. And then that text is being either delivered on the screen as text or is being delivered on voice again. So that's another way of communication with these devices that we see in the future. And we have started also to test these in hotels where we offer Alexa and Google devices, and the guests can talk to this. And then you see this in the hotel as an inbox where all of the communication comes in, and you can type the responses back, and they flow back to the guests in their rooms. And then, obviously, that's a chatbot. Obviously, we'll see chatbots more and more, especially in service industries growing, and especially also in the hotel industry, because we know that many requests and many questions are repetitive questions. So when is your restaurant open? Can I have a late checkout? All these questions will be repetitive, and we can understand them with a very high accuracy and then respond to them automatically via a chatbot. And then one of the examples is always when, for example, in Japan, where we have businesses, hotels in Japan are super afraid for the upcoming Olympics. And why they are so afraid is because they know they have so many international guests coming, and many of those don't speak the language. So English is not the number one language in Japan. And so they are afraid that there are requests coming in a language that they cannot respond to. Chatbots would be able to respond in other languages where you don't know how to respond to these. So one of the examples where a chatbot could be really helpful. So and you see that with this already how comfortable users are to communicate with a machine, basically. And we'll see this chart growing, that it doesn't matter as long as I get a good response. And these technologies will be better in the future and will probably even give you a better response than a human being. So I want to finish with giving you a quick summary. We believe messaging is here to stay. One, start testing messaging as a communication channel, and that meaning promoting it. And it's very simple. Like, it could be a text number, and then promoting that text number on your email, via email, on your website, on Google My Business, as you've seen, etc. And then you need to track the history and being able to report on trends. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. That's so interesting because there's this proliferation of messaging and just kind of keeps going. So are there any questions, especially concrete questions, maybe problems y'all might have had in your hotels or anything juicy? Well, I have a question then. So what happens when we're all in hotels and everyone's just yelling at Alexa, or she randomly is giggling at us? How much chaos can actually happen with these sort of voice-enabled tools? You've heard about this giggle, right? The Amazon Alexas have been giggling randomly. If you've not been on the internet in a day, it's creepy. Go look at it.
Yeah, I think generally we are in early days there, right? I mean, no kidding. We're in early days. The adoption will take the next couple of years. Especially voice is very hard because it still has a lot of error rates in between. You cannot understand everything. But text is much easier, right? Text is very straightforward. I need 2 towels in my room. It's not something you cannot understand. So the use case is there, and text will be much faster and much faster adoption than we'll see in voice.
And especially with different languages too, right? It becomes a much harder issue with voice.
Exactly, especially different languages. Also, people are sometimes shy to respond, right? And if you're texting something, and we know that in our personal life, sometimes you just don't want to call someone, don't want to, but texting someone, the barrier to entry is very, very low, and that means for both sides, the communication is enabled and faster and more efficient.
And maybe you can attach something like a picture if it's a problem with the room or something more specific that you need, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can do many things. Attach it. You can track it, as I said before, right? You can see who had what kind of conversation with that person, and then you can track it, and then you can also have tickets saying, oh, I got this feedback and automatically create a ticket and saying, please go to room 202 and fix this problem, and you wait till it's solved, and then you text it back automatically to this person, and it's all seamless and it's very easy, and everyone knows how to use text these days, and everyone is very comfortable in using text. And on the hotel side, you either use an app, right, where all the text flies in, and you basically think of it as an inbox, like your email inbox. That's your text inbox then from all the guests that come. And you track all the conversations you have in that inbox. So you're not actually normally you're not using your own personal device on Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or something. You use a tool, a software as a service tool, where all of these incoming messages fly in to track.
So what happens with privacy and GDPR and all these things as you start to have multiple messaging channels? What do people need to know about that if they are going to personalize through messaging? Are you guys offering any tips for privacy and making sure that people can adjust settings? How does that all work through these kind of messaging platforms?
Yeah, so privacy, obviously, GDPR is a big topic. What we always say is you need the consent, obviously, of the user to start the communication. So if you don't have the consent to start a communication, you need to get the consent first. For example, in the booking process, you need to consent to send them something, right? Or in the check-in, you need the consent to say, yes, I'm willing to receive something. But in messaging often is, if you promote messaging as a communication channel, users will start texting you first. So where you don't need consent to respond because they have given you consent once they have interacted with you. That's what legally you would say, if they reach out to you, you should be able to respond, and that's the consent they gave you once they reached out. So there's nothing you need to worry about there.
So as long as you're thinking about it and making sure at every stage you're considering it, basically?
Yeah, but it's nothing new, right? For hotels, they are writing today, they have emails that they have to send, they are sending surveys. So they're already thinking about these to get consent of the guest to being able to send them something. I think that's nothing new. Messaging is just another channel of communication, and there's nothing else that you need to think about if you do GDPR and privacy things right with all the other communication channels that you already have in place.
And so if I'm a hotel manager and I want to get started with messaging, right now we just have phones, what do you recommend for your first-time clients? What are things that you can do to just start with messaging?
I don't want to promote my company here, but that would be a good start.
And then when they're onboarding it, what kind of stuff do they need to consider as far as getting into operations? How quickly, or do you have to retrain staff?
Yeah, it's with everything. It's like you need to train staff that there's a new way of communication. Instead of an email that comes in or a phone call that comes in where the staff is trained, there's another inbox that you should consider, and there's a message coming in, and you should respond to that message. And other than that, in rollout, it's nothing else, and normally it's a software as a service tool. It's in the cloud. You don't have to install anything, so you're up and running pretty quickly. And promoting your number, which you need for starting the communication, your messaging number, that's something you can do, either plug it in on your website or plug it into your Google account or plug it into your Wi-Fi page, or show it on the reception as a banner or something like that, saying, hey, if you have any problems, if you want to communicate with us, here's the number that you can message us all the time.
And one last question about staff satisfaction. How does this impact the way the staff engages with the guests and how happy they are with their own jobs? Is there a benefit, I'm assuming? So walk us through that.
Yeah, it's like the benefit is that today with messaging you could track how you solved a problem, and you can show if the problem was solved or not solved. In the past, you cannot show that, right? You have a hotel with, I don't know, 100 rooms, and you have 20 people working there. You cannot really track transparent and visible how good of a job they did, but now you're able to track everything because you know the conversations, and you know if you solve the problems, and you know if the problem that you solved was, if the guest was happy afterwards, and you send them a survey, and you can prove, as I just showed, that those users that had the interaction are happier guests. And that's just one proof point that you can now be like very transparently show to not only to your staff but to the management, to your operations. And I think that's the beauty of something like the messaging channel, because it becomes transparent.
Fantastic. Well, let's leave it with that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ben from TrustYou.